Flight attendant kicks black billionaire family off plane, then finds out they own the airline. The airport terminal buzzed with the usual morning chaos. Business travelers rushing to their gates, families wrangling children, and vacationers filled with excitement. At Gate 32, a sleek private lounge awaited first-class passengers boarding Flight 827 from New York to Los Angeles. Among those waiting to board was the Carter family, James and Vanessa Carter, along with their two teenage children, Jordan and Maya. Dressed in understated luxury, James, a tall, distinguished man in his early 50s, adjusted the cuff of his designer suit while Vanessa, effortlessly elegant in a tailored cream jumpsuit, scrolled through emails on her tablet. Their children, Jordan and Maya, both in their late teens, shared headphones while watching a video. The Carters were no ordinary passengers. They were one of the wealthiest black families in the country, having built Carter Aviation, a multi-billion-dollar airline empire from the ground up. However, they rarely flaunted their status, preferring to travel as regular first-class passengers rather than using their fleet of private jets. As boarding began, a flight attendant named Karen Whitmore stood near the entrance of the plane, greeting passengers with a polite but rigid smile. Karen had worked in the airline industry for over a decade, and in her mind, she could always spot trouble before it started. When she saw the Carter family approaching, she immediately made a judgment. Karen eyed them skeptically. She was used to seeing wealthy passengers in first class, but in her biased mind, the Carters didn't fit the profile. She frowned slightly before forcing a smile. "Excuse me," Karen said, stepping in front of them. "First-class boarding is for priority passengers only." James raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Yes, we know. We're in first class," he replied smoothly, handing over their boarding passes. Karen barely glanced at the tickets before shaking her head. "I'm sorry, sir, but I believe there's been a mistake. This section is reserved for our premium passengers." Vanessa narrowed her eyes. "Are you saying we don't belong here?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Karen sighed, crossing her arms. "I'm saying that sometimes people purchase economy tickets and try to board first class. It happens all the time." Jordan and Maya exchanged a look, sensing the tension. James chuckled dryly. "I assure you, there's no mistake. Please check the tickets properly." Karen snatched the boarding passes and scanned them reluctantly. Her expression hardened when she saw that they were indeed first-class passengers. Still, her prejudice got the best of her. These must have been purchased using miles or an upgrade. But unfortunately, we have a strict policy: no unauthorized upgrades. Vanessa inhaled deeply, keeping her composure. "We didn't use miles or an upgrade. We purchased these tickets outright." Karen's patience was wearing thin. "Sir, ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside while I verify this with my supervisor." Another flight attendant, Michael, observed the situation from a distance. He knew exactly who the Carters were. He leaned over to whisper to Karen, "You might want to," but Karen waved him off. "I've got this." James sighed and pulled out his phone. With a few taps, he called someone. "Hey, Richard, it's James Carter. We have a bit of a situation on one of our flights." Karen scoffed, thinking he was bluffing. A few moments later, a voice came over her earpiece. "Karen, we have a problem," said the voice of her superior. "Yes, I know. These passengers are trying to board first class without the right—" "No, Karen," her supervisor interrupted. "The problem is that you just tried to kick the owners of the airline off their own plane." Karen's face drained of color. I what? You just disrespected Mr. and Mrs. Carter. They own Carter Aviation. You just tried to deny boarding to your own employer," Karen stammered, suddenly realizing the severity of the situation. The Carters were watching her, their expressions unreadable. Just then, the airport manager, Richard Gaines, rushed onto the plane. He was out of breath, sweat beading on his forehead. "Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter, I am so terribly sorry for this mix-up." He turned to Karen. "You are relieved of duty, effective immediately." "But I didn't know." Karen sputtered. "That's the problem," James said coolly. "You made a judgment about us without knowing anything. And if you treat us this way, I can only imagine how you treat other passengers who don't fit your idea of first class." Vanessa added, We built this airline to serve everyone with dignity and respect. If you can't uphold that, you don't belong here." Karen's eyes welled up with tears, but she knew there was no arguing. She removed her name tag and hurried off the plane, humiliated. As the Carters took their rightful seats in first class, Michael, the other flight attendant, approached them with a sheepish smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, I just want to say, I recognized you right away, and I'm truly sorry for what happened." James nodded. "We appreciate that. But let this be a lesson, not just for Karen, but for the whole industry. People should be judged by their actions, not assumptions." The flight took off smoothly, but the story didn't end there. News of the incident spread quickly, and Carter Aviation announced a new company-wide training program to combat bias and discrimination. As for Karen, she learned the hard way that judging people unfairly could cost her everything. And the Carters? They continued flying high, literally and figuratively, reminding the world that success has no color, only character. The flight from New York to Los Angeles was smooth, but the aftermath of the incident rippled far beyond the cabin of Flight 827. James Carter, a man who had built his empire on discipline, intelligence, and fairness, wasn't one to let things slide. After the flight, he arranged a meeting with the airline's senior leadership. Vanessa, always the strategist, had already started drafting a proposal for new company policies. Corporate headquarters, Carter Aviation. 3 days later, in the towering Carter Aviation headquarters in Atlanta, the company's top executives gathered in a sleek, modern boardroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The tension was thick as James and Vanessa sat at the head of the long mahogany table. "Let's talk about what happened on Flight 827, James began, his deep voice commanding the room's attention. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a clear display of discrimination. The VP of Customer Experience, a middle-aged man named Howard Green, shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, we've already terminated Karen Whitmore. We take this very seriously." Vanessa leaned forward. "Firing one person doesn't fix the problem, Howard. It's a systemic issue. How many other passengers have been mistreated because of the way they look? How many have been humiliated like we were?" A silence fell over the room. They knew she was right. "We need mandatory bias training for all employees, especially frontline staff," James continued. "Not just a one-time seminar, but an ongoing program. Real change comes from education, not just punishment." Howard nodded slowly. "I'll get the HR team working on it immediately." Vanessa glanced around the room. "And I want real data. I want reports on customer complaints and incident records. We need to identify patterns. If discrimination is happening under our name, we need to root it out." The executives exchanged looks. It was clear. The Carters weren't just making a statement, they were making a revolution. Karen's downfall. Meanwhile, Karen Whitmore's world was crumbling. After her firing, she struggled to find another airline willing to hire her. Word had spread fast. No company wanted the liability of an employee caught in a racial discrimination scandal. Desperate, she tried to justify her actions online, posting a lengthy rant about mistaken identity and misunderstandings. But instead of sympathy, she was met with backlash. "This is exactly the problem with the industry. People like you are why first-class travelers of color still get questioned about their seats. Maybe next time, don't assume someone doesn't belong just because of their skin color." She deactivated her social media accounts, overwhelmed by the criticism. One day, she received a call from a lawyer. At first, she thought it was someone offering her legal help, but instead, it was a notice. Carter Aviation was suing her for defamation after she falsely accused them of mistreating her in an attempt to save face. Her savings drained quickly from legal fees, and soon, she was forced to take a job at a small, low-budget airline that barely paid above minimum wage. Life had humbled her, but it was a lesson learned too late. A new legacy at Carter Aviation. A month later, Carter Aviation made headlines for implementing one of the most rigorous anti-discrimination policies in the industry. Employees were required to complete quarterly training, and customer feedback was more closely monitored. Other airlines followed suit, realizing that in an age of accountability, companies had to evolve or be left behind. James and Vanessa continued to lead with integrity, proving that real change starts at the top. And as they boarded future flights, They knew one thing for certain. No one would ever question whether they belonged again. Because they didn't just belong. They owned the sky. 1 year later, Carter Aviation's transformation had passed since the infamous Flight 827 incident. Carter Aviation had undergone a complete transformation. The airline was now recognized as a leader in customer equality, earning accolades for its anti-discrimination initiatives. As part of their efforts, James and Vanessa launched the Carter Aviation Leadership Program, offering scholarships and career opportunities for young people from underrepresented backgrounds to enter the airline industry. Pilots, flight attendants, engineers, everyone had a chance to rise. One of the biggest changes? A mystery flyer program. Trained evaluators disguised as passengers secretly tested customer service at various points in the travel experience. Any employee found engaging in discriminatory behavior faced immediate consequences. No more accidental mix-ups. No more unchecked biases. Karen's last chance. Meanwhile, Karen Whitmore had hit rock bottom. After being fired from Carter Aviation, she bounced from one low-paying job to another, her reputation following her like a dark cloud. She had tried to sue for wrongful termination, but the case was dismissed. The evidence against her, security footage, witness statements, was overwhelming. One day, while scrolling job listings on her cracked phone screen, she saw something that made her heart stop. Carter Aviation, hiring customer service associates desperate. She clicked the link. The airline was offering a second chance program for former industry employees willing to undergo intensive retraining. She hesitated. Would they even consider her? Swallowing her pride, she submitted an application. A week later, she received an email. Interview scheduled. Carter Aviation HQ. The final meeting. When Karen arrived at Carter Aviation's headquarters, her stomach churned with nerves. She was escorted to a small meeting room where two people were waiting for her. James Carter. Vanessa Carter. She froze. I didn't expect to see you both here, she stammered. James folded his hands. We personally review all second chance program applicants. Karen swallowed hard. I just want to say, I've changed. I see where I went wrong. I was raised a certain way, and I had blind spots, but I've learned. I just need a second chance. Vanessa studied her carefully. Tell us, Karen, why should we believe you? Karen took a deep breath. Because losing everything taught me what it feels like to be judged unfairly. And I don't ever want to make someone feel the way I made your family feel. James nodded slowly. It takes humility to admit that. Vanessa leaned back in her chair. Karen, our airline is built on second chances. Not just for customers, but for employees too. We're willing to give you one. Under one condition. Karen's eyes widened. Anything? You won't start as a flight attendant, Vanessa said. You'll start in customer sensitivity training, teaching others the mistakes you made. Karen blinked. Wait, you want me to? Help others unlearn their biases, James finished. We believe you'll be more effective teaching from experience. If you prove yourself, we'll consider reassigning you to a customer-facing role later. Tears welled in Karen's eyes. I won't let you down. James stood up and extended his hand. Then welcome to Carter Aviation. Let's see if you've really changed. Taking flight once more months later, Karen was thriving in her new role. She had become a passionate advocate for fairness in the airline industry, helping others recognize and overcome unconscious bias. One day, while leading a training session for new hires, she noticed a familiar sight. A black family boarding a flight in first class. She watched as one of the young flight attendants hesitated before greeting them. Karen stepped in. Welcome aboard, she said warmly to the family, before turning to the flight attendant with a knowing look. Here at Carter Aviation, we judge people by their character, not their assumptions. The flight attendant nodded, embarrassed but grateful for the reminder. As Karen watched the family take their seats, she smiled. This time, she got it right. And she wasn't just flying again. She was soaring.